how you and I interact with the earth during our time here on this planet is pretty important, as well as all the other human beings that are on this earth. So today we're going to talk about human impact on the biosphere. This is chapter 32. And in this chapter, what we're going to cover is biodiversity and why it's important that we have that biodiversity. And also, what sort of resource do we need from Earth for our basic human needs? And lastly, because we do need these resources and we want it not only for our present self, but for future generations, what can we do to be sustainable? So let's first look at biodiversity. And why is biodiversity important? So let's introducing conservation biology. Conservation biology is the study that focuses on natural resources for the present timeline, right? So the timeline that you and I are living in, as well as for future generation. Why is it important that we continue to study conservation biology? Well, it's because understanding the interaction within an ecosystem and how it can support biodiversity is actually really important, not only for the earth, but for humans as well, right? Having that biodiversity is crucial for a healthy planet. It is crucial for understanding what resources are available, how we can regulate the ecosystem, how we can support food security, economic stability, and also just our lifestyle, like humans' health and cultural lifestyle. We are currently facing the sixth massive extinction right now. And this one that we're currently experiencing is more rapid than the previous 5 mass extinctions. It is estimated that as many as 10 to 20% of all species may be extinct in the next 30 to 50 years. So that's not that long from now that we might see a mass extinction. And so in the United States, we are already seeing that many plants and animals are in danger of habitat loss. That's going to play a big part of why certain plants and animals might go extinct, right? In addition, other factors that contribute to biodiversity loss can be the introduction of exotic species. So certain species that are not native, and we see this a lot in California, where we have certain plant species or animal species that are not native, but they kind of take over the habitat of the native plants. And so that can lead to extinction. We also have water and air pollutions that can affect species. And lastly, over exploitation of natural resource, right? There are certain resources that are not renewable, and we can only take so much before it leads to detriment events such as loss of different species. So here in California, we are one of the biodiversity hotspots. And so there's only a few hotspots, and they're not distributed evenly. But these hotspots are regions that contain over 50% of known plant species and 42% of all known terrestrial vertebrate species, right? So we can see that California is actually one of them. So if you kind of remember when we did the tour of the environmental study area, that we saw like one of the reasons why California has so many different plant species, because we're home to so many different types of plant community, right? We have everything from the chaparral to the desert to the redwood forest, over to the sand dune. Like there was like 12 different plant community that you had observed, and so each one of these communities have different terrain, they have different weather, and they have different soil and nutrients, and so that leads to a variety and a diverse set of plants. And so California is labeled as one of those biodiversity hotspots. Other ones include the Amazon rainforest, Madagascar, the Sri Lanka, Indo-Burma region is another one, and the Mediterranean basin. We also have certain regions in Southeast Asia and South Africa and in Brazil, the Atlantic forests in Brazil and the Caribbean islands. So these are all different regions on Earth that have a wide variety of different plant species as well as different terrestrial species. So why is it important that we actually prioritize the conservation of these different lands and protect the different lands? And well, it's because we want to protect the different biodiversity, right? Because not only do the plants vary, but those plants become home to many different insects and birds and mammals. And so if we are losing the habitat of these regions, that can definitely affect in the long run what species are able to thrive and survive, and as well as what resource will be available. And those impacts can not only impact the diversity, the biodiversity, but also humans as well. So an example of why natural resources are important in our day-to-day life is looking at how it affects human health. An example of that would be the many different prescription drugs that we have actually found in nature. So the first example I'm going to tell you about is the periwinkle. So the periwinkle is actually a flower that's found in Madagascar, and it's used to treat 2 forms of cancer. The first one is vinblastine, which has been found to be able to treat Hodgkin disease. And the second one is vincristine, and that one has been used to treat childhood leukemia. And with this treatment, the survival rate for childhood leukemia actually jumped from 10% to 90%. And that's pretty significant to now be able to have such a high survival rate. And so that's thanks to periwinkle. And so not only is that an amazing flower that provides medicine, but it's also really pretty too. Another example would be the antibiotic penicillin. So this antibiotic is actually derived from fungus that is part of the genus Penicillium. So it was found and discovered by Alexander Fleming, who noticed that when he had mold growing on his petri dish plates, that around there would be no bacteria. So it was found that this mold actually inhibit bacterial growth, and hence we were able to discover the antibiotic penicillin to treat different bacterial infection. Sometimes the different organisms that we study doesn't provide a direct medicine that we can derive from it, but rather influence our study. So an example would be the 9-banded armadillo. So the 9-banded armadillo is used to study leprosy. And leprosy, what it is it's a chronic bacterial infection that's caused by this Mycobacterium leprae. So the issue with this bacterium is that it doesn't grow in a laboratory. In order for us to understand it and be able to study it, we have to find a host organism, which would be this little guy, this 9-banded armadillo. So the 9-banded armadillo is a natural host for the Mycobacterium leprae. And through this study, we were able to find antibiotic. Prior to the 1940s and the discovery of different medication as well as the antibiotic, people who had leprosy had to actually be contained and placed in different communities. So there would be these leopard colonies that people would live together, because leprosy is actually pretty contagious. It is passed through respiratory droplets. And so if you're in contact with someone with leprosy, you can easily contact leprosy yourself. And so these different communities popped up where people with leprosy would live together because they were already infected. Leprosy can lead to different skin patches, like different irritation on their skin. It can also affect their peripheral nerves, eyes, the upper respiratory tract. And currently, there are still leopard colonies that exist in different countries, but we're actually able to treat it now with different medication, including antibiotics. And the last organism that I'm going to highlight is this guy right here, which is the Gila monster. So the Gila monster is a very slow-moving venomous lizard that lives in the southwestern region. And in 1980s, scientists were studying this Gila monster because they found that the Gila monster can go for extended period of time without eating. And so they discovered that there is this hormone-like protein that's found in their venom called extendin-4. And this protein was found to be able to regulate blood sugar level and just slow down their digestion. And so from that, they found that this was very similar to a naturally occurring hormone that we have in our system called a glucagon-like peptide, or GLP-1. And so through this discovery, scientists were able to form a synthetic version of this protein that they call semaglutide. And the semaglutide is actually the active ingredient that is found in Ozempic. So it mimics the effect of GLP-1 and helps diabetics be able to control their blood sugar level. And as a side effect of that, interestingly, they found that this could help people lose weight. And so this is, but the original discovery for Ozempic, which is now kind of tied to weight loss, as well as the treatment of diabetes, originated from research study of the Gila monster and why it's able to sustain such long periods of not being able to eat, or not being able to eat. Okay. Another contribution of the biodiversity that we have is how does it contribute to our agriculture? So an example of this would be agricultural crops. A lot of the crops that we cultivate and that we use will often be susceptible to like different viruses. And it's found that if we crossbreed them with different wild plants that exist, that these wild plants have certain genes that are resistant to these viruses. So by doing a crossing with wild plants, we're actually able to improve the health of our own agricultural crops. Additionally, it's found that different insects can actually be biological pest control. So rather than using chemical pesticides, what if we actually use biological pest control? So you can kind of think about how, to get rid of aphids, rather than actually spraying with a pesticide, maybe you bring in ladybugs, and the ladybugs can kind of help with regards to consuming the aphids, right? Which are getting at your crops and kind of destroying your crops. So this is an example of a biological pest control. Additionally, the value of biodiversities are different pollinators. So everything from different insects to different birds can all be valuable as pollinator. So an example of this would be domestic honeybees. Domestic honeybees can pollinate and help produce about $10 billion worth of food crop in the United States. And then wild pollinators, so those that aren't domesticated, can help bring in even more money with regards to food crop, right? So wild pollinator can pollinate over $235 billion a year worth of food crop in the United States. That's pretty big. Okay, so now that we've discussed like kind of why biodiversity is important, in the next section, let's talk about the different resources that are out there and what resource do we as human beings on this earth need in order to fulfill our basic needs.